they have their bone development, if you will, occur in 3 separate locations. 2 epiphyses and the diaphysis. With the idea being that when you are in young adulthood, this is what your bones look like, all right? You've got articulating cartilage at the top, epiphysis, not articular cartilage, but epiphyseal cartilage here, epiphyseal cartilage, which we would call a bingo, all right? The diaphysis, more growth plate, more epiphyseal cartilage, another diaphysis, or epiphysis rather. Boy, can I just start this over? This is getting hard. All right, let's try it again. Articulating cartilage, proximal epiphysis, growth plate, diaphysis, epiphyseal plate, distal epiphysis, articular cartilage. Jeez, that was entirely harder than it should have been. The idea here being, again, all right, take home message, that in a long bone like this, you're going to have 2 growth plates. And they're very important. This is the area upon which bone will get longer when you're going through puberty, as an example. And that bone started growing in 3 separate locations. The idea that bone started growing in 3 separate locations gives us the bone that looks like what we think of when we think about bones, all right? Like you can see these growth plates in x-rays. You can see these growth plates, in their remnants at least, in an adult. So understanding this and grasping that your bones had a lot of cartilage and a lot of fiber in them when you were born gives us an idea about how the skeleton develops. And in reality, gives us an idea about how the skeleton will heal itself when it's damaged. Because it's going to heal back in much the same ways it grew initially. All right, good. Now then, let's go here. Intramembranous ossification. So this is endochondral ossification. This is intramembranous ossification. The idea here is very simplistic. Whereas endochondral ossification, you'll have a cartilage model and bone will develop on that cartilage model. That'd be endochondral in cartilage, right? Oh, it's gonna be a weird day. I can already feel it. It's gonna be a weird day, team. Hey, you want to cut me some slack? I'll cut you all some slack, all right? In intramembranous ossification, what's going to take place here is there will be a double membrane system, all right, stack. And you'll have ossification begin somewhere in that double membrane stack, and the bone will just grow until it meets the membrane and then spread from that point out, all right? Bone starts to grow in one location, it meets the membrane at the top and bottom surface, and then it just grows through that membrane like a guide, like a template, all right? Imagine having a pan or something and pouring fluid into it. It just spreads through the bottom of the pan. That's what bone does with these membranes. It meets the membrane and it grows through the length of the membrane to fill it. And you can see that. Like if you look here, you can see little areas of ossification, right? And if you pay attention to it, you can almost make out where these plates began to grow and then spread. Begin to grow and spread. They're called primary ossification centers. And that's why when you look at the skull, in these sutures, it's got this crazy sort of interweaving pattern. Can you make that out?
Mm-hmm.
Because the bones are glued together and sort of anchor themselves to one another. Right? So that's classic intramembranous ossification. Bones begin to grow in one location and then spread throughout until they meet and then kind of interlace with one another. That's what forms the sutures on the skull, all right? So that's how these bones fit together. This will be a fibrous joint in you, okay, a young adult. And then once you're, 50, 60, this is a solid connection. It's bone to bone. All right, good. We'll do. Let's go here. Interstitial growth versus appositional growth. I've been kind of hinting around at this for quite a while, all right? So I'm kind of glad to be here at this stage. Interstitial, oh, dudes, I'm telling you, today's going to be a weird one, all right? Just bear with me. Let me try this again without random dyslexic word placements. Interstitial growth, there we go, that's it. I kept seeing the in there and throwing it in. Real wrong. Interstitial growth versus appositional growth. Interstitial growth is how bone lengthens. Appositional growth is how bone gains thickness. Okay? Bone lengthening versus bone thickness. In bone lengthening, you can take a wild guess as to where this is going to occur. This is going to be a growth plate thing, okay? Whereas bone thickening can happen pretty much any time. Okay, you know that there have been times in your life where you grew very quickly. Puberty is a good example of this. And there have been times in your life where you did not grow very quickly at all, if at all. In fact, you probably haven't attained any height anytime recently. Is that relatively factual?
Yes.
Let's talk about why, okay? Interstitial growth, increasing in length, requires a growth plate, all right? Requires a growth plate. And this growth plate has cartilage in it, but over time, the growth plate cartilage goes away and the bone solidifies and the bone can no longer lengthen. You have to have the growth plate for the bones to get longer. And we, as adults, have gone through a process that we tend to call, welcome folks, that we tend to call plate closure, okay? Plate closure. As we age, the growth plates in our long bones get smaller and smaller and eventually go away. And you get bone-to-bone contact and it forms a solid bone. In females, this is about 18 years old. All right. In males, it's a little bit later, up to about 21. Why? Don't say hormones. I mean, that's a good answer, but not what I'm looking for. What did you notice when you were 12 or 13? Much taller than the males you knew. Because? Exactly. All right. Females tend to begin this cycle faster, earlier, much earlier than do males, okay, by years in a lot of cases. And the side effect of this is that boys lag behind in terms of height until about age 14 or 15, and then the males tend to get a little taller because the boys will grow up until about age 21, okay? Start later, grow longer, if that makes any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
And dudes, let me tell you, if we had time on our hands, which we don't, I would lay into the triggering mechanisms behind puberty because they are so fascinating. We don't have the time, so I'm not going to do it. I'm here to tell you, it's different than what you think. It's super cool. All right. Yeah, I'm not going to do it. All right. Then there is appositional growth, or growth in thickness of the bone. All right. Bones get thicker. This is sort of what happens. When must this happen, and when can this happen? That's a good set of questions. Well, bones must get thicker as they get longer, okay? Bones can't stay the same tiny diameter when they're getting really, really long, or they're going to be prone to fracture. So as your bones elongate, they have to get thicker. But when can bones get thicker? Well, this is non-age dependent, okay? So we probably have talked about this, but I'm going to say it again just to make a clear point here, okay? You can quit what you're doing right now and go buy you a guitar and start playing guitar all the dadgum time, and the ends of your fingers will toughen. Yes?
Yes.
You can quit what you're doing right now and go and work on a farm for the rest of your days and be outdoors all the dadgum time, and your skin tone will darken. You can stop what you're doing right now and start going to one of these gyms in Tuscaloosa all the dadgum time and work out all the time, and your muscles will get larger. Yes?
Yes.
In the same way, right now, you could go and be doing a bunch of heavy lifting exercises, and you can make your skeleton get stronger. Okay, it'll thicken. Appositional growth can happen any time in the life cycle. Okay? The idea is, tell me Wolfswell's next slide. It's not. All right, the idea is that bones have the ability to toughen, to thicken up anytime they need to, depending upon the stresses they see. Okay, depending upon the stresses they see. So appositional growth can happen anytime. Whereas long bone growth and length, interstitial growth, can only happen up until the ages designated here. Good, let's go here. So let's talk about long bone growth, shall we? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run you through how bones lengthen at the growth plate. In particular, what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline what the growth plate looks like and sort of how it works. So I invite you to read this slide. I invite you to learn these terms. I'm simply going to run you through how it works. All right? And away we go. Your growth plates. All right, your growth plates look something like this. If blow this up, it'll look something like this. If you take a piece of one of these and bring it down here, we can go through and look at the way the cells look and identify some distinctive variations in this growth plate. All right? Let me tell you about these zones. Here we go. There is a zone of reserve cartilage, a zone of cellular proliferation, a zone of hypertrophy, a zone of calcification, and a zone of bone deposition. Now, the heck is all this mean? Here we go. A zone of reserve cartilage. This is resting, living, happy cartilage cells. No big deal. They're just hanging out in there. It's reserve cartilage. I come until you hit puberty, you got lots of reserve cartilage. These cells are just hanging out in there doing what these cells do. They're sitting in place, being prepared to grow. Okay? They're just cartilage cells, being cartilage cells, or chondrocytes, hanging out in there, doing their thing. And then you start cranking out certain hormones. Okay? A really good example of this would be growth hormone. Are we all in agreement on this? Mm-hmm. Growth hormone, very important to your growth, as it were. Makes you get taller. And when growth hormone is influencing the system, the cells here begin to proliferate. It means they divide. The zone of proliferation is where the cells divide. Take one cell, it divides into two smaller cells. Let me say that again. Take one big cell from the reserve cartilage, and it will divide into two smaller cells. Now that intuitively does not make the bone get longer. Okay? But then, the next zone is the zone of cell hypertrophy. Hypertrophy means to grow larger, get bigger. Hypertrophy. So you take some cells of reserve cartilage, they divide into two parts. You can see how small they are here. Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. And then they get larger. They go through hypertrophy. And you see them getting larger? This makes the bone get longer. It elongates the bone. Once finished with the zone of hypertrophy, the cells there calcify. They turn into calcified cartilage. And you hopefully recall from our conversation a little while back that calcified cartilage is a good base from which bone can be formed. Mm-hmm. Once you have calcified cartilage, you bring in osteoblastic cells, and the osteoblasts use the calcified cartilage almost like a nutrient source. And they lay down spongy bone. Right? So, reserve cartilage hanging out. Zone of cellular proliferation. This is where the cells go through what process? What is cell division called? Mitosis. Mitosis, good. And then they go through hypertrophy, they grow larger. They calcify, a zone of calcification. You can see the spicules here. See this white stuff, right? So that's all big spicules of calcium. Little masses of calcium. And then you bring in osteoblastic cells and they lay down actual bone. This is how your bones lengthen. Okay? The thicker the reserve cartilage, the more long bone lengthening that can occur. I'm sure I've said this to you before, but we can make measurements of a person's epiphyseal plates and have a pretty good grasp of how tall they're going to get. Now, can we play with this hormonally? Yeah. But normally a pretty good grasp, right? Pretty good grasp. Let's go here. All right, and then there's appositional growth and thickness. And the idea goes something like this. When bones are bending too much, hang on, that bears a question. When bones are bending too much, how do your bones know when they're bending? How does your body know when your bones are bending? What do your bones have in them?
Joints.
Well, that's true. What'd you say? Cartilage. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, that's absolutely true and important to this conversation. What are bone cells called?
Osteocytes.
What do osteocytes do? What do they sense when they're hanging out inside that bony membrane? Remember, osteocytes aren't just hanging out there doing nothing. They sense stress and strain. You guys remember this?
Yes.
Okay, so the osteocytes hanging out inside the lacunae, inside the bone bones, they sense stress and strain. So when they're picking up undue stress and strain, they're going to signal the body, and the body's going to bring in osteoblastic cells to lay down extra bone along the outside. Okay? So appositional growth is starts with osteoblastic activity, laying down excess bone along the outside margin of this bony tissue. But remember, when our bones get really thick, what happens to them in terms of their weight? They also get quite heavy. And we don't want heavy bones. So what we do is we bring in osteoclasts. And the osteoclasts will tear up the inside of this thing so that the bone gets generally thicker and stronger and tougher, but not super heavy. It doesn't become solid. Okay, it's not like a big solid piece. There's open space. There's a marrow cavity inside of here. Okay? We're all aware of this, yes?
Yes.
There's a marrow cavity in there. But the idea is we don't want the bones to get too thick, so we have osteoclastic activity come in and clean up the inside of this. Yeah, man, that's a lot. Yeah, good. So let's make sure we're clear. Interstitial growth, growth in length. When does this occur? Puberty up until late teens, early 20s. Whereas appositional growth, growth in thickness, can happen
Whenever.
anytime. Good. All right, let's talk about our hormones. So there are a few hormones that are very, very important to this process. The first and most important is indeed growth hormone. All right, growth hormone stimulates your epiphyseal plates and makes you get bigger. You release a little bit early in life, and you get a little bit bigger. And then when you go through puberty, you crank out growth hormone like it's going out of style. And then the amount of growth hormone you produce drops off dramatically once you have plate closure. All right? Let me tell you a little story. So there's this guy. All right, he was in my class probably from about 5th grade on. Like, I didn't dislike this guy. He was all right. He's, he's a normal classmate. But then we go through like 7th grade. About 7th grade, people start getting much taller very quickly. You're going through that stage like a caterpillar in its pupation, okay? You're going from your immature state to your mature state via this process that we call puberty. Are we all in agreement on this?
Mm-hmm.
Old Clay, this guy, it ain't happening. All right? Everybody else getting taller, he is not getting taller. Nothing is changing. His parents were probably getting a little worried. All right? He was never the biggest guy. He was always kind of small, but he ain't getting taller at all. Everybody else is towering over him now. So they take him to a doctor. Turns out he isn't manufacturing very much growth hormone. For whatever reason, you can say. He's not making much of this stuff. So he starts going in and getting shots of growth hormone. They're giving this kid, I don't know how normal this is, but this was happening. They're giving this kid growth hormone shots. And buddy, let me tell you, within a year and a half, he's like 6 foot tall, 6'1". He was one of the taller people in the class. All right? So I'm sitting here like, I'll have what he's having. Why would he get so tall so quickly? Because they're dosing the kid on growth hormone. And growth hormone tells resting reserve cartilage to start proliferating, et cetera, hypertrophy, calcification, bone formation. You guys get my point?
Yes.
It's all cellular signaling. This is all cellular signaling. Do the bones need to get thicker? Well, you've got cellular signaling that's making sure that takes place. Do the bones need to elongate? Boy, it looks so nasty outside too. Turn around and look out those windows. No fun to be had out there, all right?
No.
Well, what y'all missed out on is back in the day when there were always horses running around the fields out there. A+ place to teach. Moving on. Let me continue down my divergence. This hormone influence caused this kid to grow very tall very quickly. And it does the same thing for you. The variation is you make it yourself, or you made it yourself, whereas he had to have it done in injections. But his body didn't care where it came from. It's all about cellular signaling. That's an important point to make here. All right, then there's thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone just kind of plays with the function of growth hormone, helps to regulate it to some degree. No big deal. Just make sure the bones get to their appropriate locations and proportions. So it helps with the activity of growth hormone. And then, of course, we can't not discuss testosterone and estrogens. So these are our male and female secondary sexual hormones. They drive male and female secondary sexual characteristics. You take the skeleton of a 5-year-old male and female and look at them and they're almost identical to one another. Take the skeletons of a 15-year-old male and female and look at them, they're distinctly different. All right, distinctly different. The alignment of bone parts shifts. The sizes of certain bones is dramatically different. I mean, things are different. And it's all from the influence of these hormones. So do we all have, femurs? Of course we do. But are our femurs a little different because of the hormone influences that we have seen? Absolutely. Okay, absolutely. Yeah, any excess or deficits of these can cause all kinds of problems. So I have to talk about this image set. I dare say one of my favorite slides. And I also thought somebody was going to do that one. All right, here we go. Guy on the left, I believe that's pituitary dwarfism. All right, so this is a full-grown adult male, but he is incredibly short because he does not produce appropriate amounts of growth hormone, or alternatively, his body doesn't make cartilage in the appropriate fashion for him to grow larger. Okay, whereas technical difficulties. Whereas this fella here has gigantism. Gigantism is caused typically by a pituitary tumor, which made him produce massive quantities of growth hormone throughout his life. So he's grown taller and taller and taller and taller, and he will be growing taller until the day he dies. And I believe that probably has already happened because this is not a young slide. Folks like this tend only to live until about 40 years old. The human heart can't handle attaining 8 or 9 feet in height. It doesn't work. And then there's this image set, which I think is incredibly telling.
Oh, I love it.
All right. 10 points on your exam. What movie is this from?
Conan the Barbarian.
Oh my God, you guys make me happy. Jeez, so rare. So rare to have people know important things about human history, which is what this is. Most, let's see, what's the term set? The most easily recognized sporting figure in the 20th century.
Andre the Giant.
Andre the Giant, all right? Everybody knew Andre, no matter where you were from or who you were. Back in the day, everybody knew who Andre the Giant was. Super famous as a professional wrestler. Started doing some movies. Like, everybody loved Andre too. He's like a super friendly, happy guy. You just wouldn't believe it. Now that being said, no human would ever cross him in real life. No human would ever cross Andre in real life. There are tales of woe about people who made him angry when he was intoxicated.
Uh-oh.
You don't want to be a part of that. He grabbed a car and threw it at somebody one time. Pretty fascinating. This was not a small, weak man. Who's in the middle? Who's this little bitty fellow?
Arnold.
That is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Governor in California? Yeah. He's like 6 foot tall. This is not a small fella. But look at him between these two guys, yeah? All right. Who's this?
I can't tell who that
You mean lay it on you? Yeah. Greatest basketball player of all time. Hands down. We all love us some Jordan. And LeBron James ain't even in this conversation. Right? That is Wilt Chamberlain.
Yeah.
And the reason Wilt Chamberlain's the greatest basketball player of all time is because they had to change the rules to stop him from getting 75 to 100 points per game. Yeah. They had to change the rules so he couldn't live by himself. That's pretty impressive. Now, the reason I have this image set up here is very simplistic. Andre had gigantism. Andre had a pituitary tumor that caused him to get incredibly tall over time. He grew continuously until the day he died. Look at his facial features. Look at his forehead. Look at his hands. If you could see his ears, okay, look at his hands over here. Look at this guy's forehead. These are classic examples of excessive growth hormone production. Big forehead, large ears. The hands get abnormally sized, man. Look how huge the hand is compared to the arm here. The hands get massive because anywhere there's cartilage, that cartilage grows out of control. The jaw does this. So you get this big jaw line. Like you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. Whereas, look at Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's not a small fella. I mean, he looks small here, but he's not a small fella, but his proportions are normal. Yes? Now look at Wilt Chamberlain. Normal proportions. If we were all standing in the windows here and Wilt Chamberlain was walking across the field in the backpack there, you might grasp that he was kind of slender. But you wouldn't have any grasp of how tall he was, okay? Because his proportions are totally normal. Why are his proportions totally normal, whereas Andre's are a little off? Lights. Stuff shocking me lately. Irritated. Shocking.
I don't have a good answer for that.
Because Wilt Chamberlain was just genetically tall. He was one of those 1%ers. Just tall. Alright? Just genetically tall.
What wasn't it?
He went through puberty, and I'm sure it was a terrible experience. Because he attained multiple feet of height by the time he was about 20 years old. Then he stopped growing, it was over. He just grew like a normal human grows. He just grew a lot taller than normal humans typically grow. Like, I have known totally normal humans that were like 4'8". No medical condition. They're just genetically short. And I've known really tall folks that were just genetically tall. This is not a medical condition. You can attain this height normally, okay? Whereas, look at the hands, okay? Look at the jawline, look at the forehead. Gigantism, different. Growth hormone problems. Are we together on this? All right, so it's kind of a neat nuance to this. All right, bone homeostasis. So you recycle about 5 to 7% of your bone mass every week. You do the math on this, you'll replace your spongy bone about every 3 to 4 years. So all the spongy bone you have today will be gone and replaced with new spongy bone within the next 4 years, and your whole skeleton turns over on about a 10-year cycle. So you attain your full adult skeletal size by the time you're 20, okay? By the time you're 30, you have a brand new skeleton. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's totally wild. So your skeleton is constantly tearing itself down and rebuilding new, because when bone gets old, it gets brittle. And you don't want brittle bones. As we get much older, 70s, okay, the skeleton really slows down on this. You've probably heard of, grandma, grandpa falling and breaking a hip or something like that. Yes?
Yes.
Like, let me tell you, if you guys are walking down the hall out here and you trip and fall, I'm gonna come check on you, but on the inside, I'll laugh. Whereas some of our older folks that work here do the exact same thing, man, they got broken bones from that. See the difference? All right, so this is a very important process. This concept of constantly replacing the skeleton, bone remodeling, bone repair, that's happened throughout human lifespan, bone remodeling and bone repair, are very important for us. Let's go here. And in this, we have a few hormones to discuss. These are parathyroid hormone, calcitonin, and serotonin. Really, we need to talk about parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. All right. What we're doing here, team, is we are regulating how bone gets laid down and how bone gets taken back up. Because remember, your bones are basically a bank for what? Basically a calcium bank. That is indeed correct. Parathyroid hormone raises blood calcium. Ooh, this feels important. This feels important. Parathyroid hormone raises blood calcium. And when we say it raises blood calcium, what we mean to say is the parathyroid hormone increases osteoclastic activity. Okay? Parathyroid hormone increases the activity of osteoclasts. What this will do is parathyroid hormone will pull calcium out of the bones and put it in the blood. If you don't have enough calcium in the blood, you'll die immediately. So this is very important. Now, I want you to notice something. It says, removes calcium from bone regardless of bone integrity. I don't care if your bones are already soft from osteoporosis. You will die if your blood calcium is unstable. So we'll take it out of the bones no matter what. This is what leads to the really nasty side effects of osteoporosis. Try that again. The really nasty side effects, there we go, of osteoporosis. Let me not put raising the T's in. All right, there's calcitonin. Calcitonin lowers blood calcium. We'll take a wild guess as to how. You might increase osteoclastic activity. Right? Increase osteoclastic activity. This is going to take calcium out of the bloodstream, store it away in the bones, just like a bank. All right? Increasing osteoblastic activity. That's what calcitonin does. And then there's serotonin. Have I made you guys write up anything for me lately? Oh, wait.
We had the vitiligo thing the other day.
That was-
it.
they-
But that was like last
A
week.
while back.
That was last week, I think.
Extra credit February 7th? Or was vitiligo last week? Was that
I think
last
vitiligo
week?
was last week. Maybe it was the week before.
I
It
knew
doesn't
I had-
matter.
I had something sitting on my desk, and normally I don't leave things sitting on my desk if I've already put the scores in, right? So they're probably fresh.
Just do it.
You can do another one.
I'll say you can do another one. It's fine. We're here for it.
There are quite a lot of people out there.
Ooh, well, not many looking around. We did pretty good. Most folks got here, and I'm impressed by that. Maybe I should give you some credit for being here.
Yeah.
All right, let me tell you a little bit about serotonin, then we'll talk, all right? There has been, and I haven't checked this in a couple years, that's why I'm saying I should learn more, there has been some evidence that would say that increased amounts of serotonin interferes with osteoblastic activity. And the way that we've kind of figured this out is because people that are taking serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Now let's make sure we understand, what does serotonin do for you?
Makes you feel,
Just a little better.
just makes
The
you feel
mood elevator.
nice.
Serotonin just makes you feel a little bit better. So like Prozac, you guys know what I'm talking about? Mood elevators, all right? What these drugs do is they make serotonin stay in the system a little bit longer. It's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. The serotonin stays active longer, all right? So it makes you feel a little bit better. It's a mood elevating medication. There's been some evidence that folks that are on these for prolonged periods of time, I think decades, there's some evidence that would say that they have weaker skeletons on average than people who have not been taking these medications. And that would lead us to think that perhaps serotonin interferes with osteoblastic activity. I'm not aware of the mechanism behind this. I don't know if there have been follow-up studies that have found other sampling artifacts that led to this improper conclusion. If you want to write me a paragraph, I'm not asking for much this time, folks. We're doing like a paragraph, like this, handwritten, just a nice paragraph. Go and read about if serotonin has any influence on skeletal development. And I want modern stuff. If it ain't 2020 or better, I don't care, okay? I want to know about modern stuff. Give me a good paragraph, bring it in to me on Wednesday, and we'll just go from there. Deal?
Serotonin what?
Has any influence on skeletal development? Serotonin have any influence on skeletal development? And it's got to be modern. I don't care about stuff from 3 years ago. I want modern stuff. I want to know what's happening cutting edge. All right, good enough. Let's go here. Oh, finally, we arrive. All right, how many times have I said the bones respond to the stresses we place upon them? 4 or 5?
Many.
100 times? This is a reference to what we call Wolff's Law. Wolff's Law states that bone growth or remodeling takes place in response to the demands placed upon them. That is to say that if you stress your bones out, your bones will get stronger. Okay? Much like, again, if you start playing that guitar, your fingertips toughen. If you start stretching your bones constantly, your bones will get bigger. They'll get stronger and tougher and harder to break. Full circle. All right. My example here is a tennis player. Imagine this tennis player really using that right arm. Yeah? I mean, a left arm, you might get a backhand in every now and again. You might throw a tennis ball up in the air, but it's that right arm that's doing the work. Are we all in agreement here?
Yes.
It's that right arm. And if you were to do a nice x-ray of this individual, provided she isn't doing like really crazy strenuous exercise outside, like to keep herself balanced, you can guarantee her right arm skeletal density will look quite a bit different from her left. Is that fair? What's fascinating about this is we can see it in historical records as well. there was all right, y'all gonna like this. It's mildly applicable. There was was she a Neanderthal? I think she was Homo sapien. There was a hunter, a female hunter found recently. And that really kind of threw a wrench into the assumed, gender roles 45,000 years ago, okay? They found this lady's skeleton with all of her hunting accoutrement, like all this cool stuff, her points and all of her skinning knives and all this stuff. How do they know she was a hunter? Not because of all the tools that were around her, but because of her arm, all right? She had the distinctive bone density variances on one side as opposed to the other because she was throwing a freaking spear into dinner every night. And that is pretty dadgum cool from my perspective, all right? So you see this quite often. There's another example. You should look this up. It was either Rome or Greece. I think it was Greek. There was what would the term be? Master potter, a lady master potter that they found the gravesite of pretty recently. I feel like she was Greek. Don't quote me on that. How do they know that she was a master potter? Because they looked at her bone variances, and it's the same exact bone variances that you would see in a modern day master potter. Like certain bones are bigger than others. The body is set up in certain ways. I think in particular in this case, it was a leg thing. Like the bones in her leg were massive because she's running this treadle, to keep the pot spinning while she's working them with her hands. So the bones in this leg were just freaking crazy compared to these, if that makes any sense at all. And it is super cool, man. That's taking knowledge that we have here and applying it to the past and being able to interpret some pretty neat stuff from it. So, yeah, Wolff's Law dictates that bones respond to the stresses we place upon them. And that is to say that we all quit work right now, we all quit school, and we just started living at crunch, our bone density would change, all right? You get much tougher, thicker, stronger bones in a relatively short period of time, a matter of years, if you're really intense. Oh, not a question. All right, I was like, ooh, excitement. Let's have it. All right, good. And I got a reference. All right. You look at the skull. You see all these weird little points and stuff sticking off? Mm-hmm. Weird little lumps, like random stuff. Okay, there's all these weird little lumps. If I grab are we feeling like an arm or a leg? Leg?
Leg.
If you look at this, still lower leg. If you look at this, can you see all these weird things sticking up? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, these weird little undulations, spots as it were. This is areas where tendons and ligaments connect. Look at that. See the patellar tuberosity here? This is areas where ligaments would be connecting to the bone, or tendons in this particular case. And they're constantly yanking against that area of the bone. So because they're constantly yanking at this area of the bone, every time you extend your leg, all right, this is what's happening. The bones there, the osteocytes there are sending messages saying, hey, we're under attack in essence, okay? When there's a lot of stress and strain in this area, so your bones will thicken in areas where tendons and ligaments connect because of Wolff's Law as well. So anywhere you see these weird spots on the bone, roughened areas, you gotta know that there's either a tendon or a ligament connecting there, constantly pulling against it, leading it to have that thickened area. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, man. That's Wolff's Law. How to do. Let's talk about breaking bones, shall we? This is a fun conversation. Everybody's got good broken bone stories. It's going to go something like this. There are 3 either-or fracture classifications, then a number of named forms of bone fractures. Okay? Let's talk about some of these and see where it takes us. First things first, there are non-displaced fractures, and then there are displaced fractures. A non-displaced fracture is pretty easy to deal with. Bone breaks, but the 2 ends stay in rough alignment. So it's pretty easy for this to heal back up. Like, somebody was asking me about ribs the other day. Was that in class, or was that in my office? Must have been in my office. And they were like, why don't we have casts for ribs?
We can't,
I was
unfortunately.
like, well, when a rib breaks, what you gotta realize is that you've got all this muscle that just holds everything together, so it's kind of self-casting. The chance of a rib coming out of alignment, you're gonna have other problems if you break a rib and it comes out of alignment, okay? Real major issues. A non-displaced fracture is where the bone breaks but the ends stay basically together, heals fast. Whereas a displaced fracture, what you can see here, this is bad news, okay? The displaced fracture is bad news, and taking care of this is no fun for anyone involved. I will use my own table as opposed to making you move. All right, let's say I got a broken, what is this? Starts with an F.
Femur.
Nope, femur be up there. The fibula, there you go,
Fibula.
broken fibula. And it's displaced in this nature. What do I have to do? How? All right, they put you in traction is what they do. So imagine they sit you up on the table and they clamp you down and then they put that end into a little machine that applies tension. You ever heard of a torture rack? Back in the day,
Mhm.
they would stretch people to get confessions,
Mhm.
to be stretched. Yes. So they're gonna clamp you down to the table, they're gonna pull that leg. And as they pull that leg, these bones are going to stretch past one another, and then can be physically manipulated and put back into alignment, and you take the tension off and 2 inch realign. Perfect world, that's how this works, okay? Doesn't always happen that way, but perfect world, perfect world. I am told this is not a fun procedure.
That sounds awful.
Never personally experienced it. My only fracture you've seen, okay? Yeah,
What would be the result of them not putting it back?
pins and screws. Oh, you talking about if it stayed like that to heal?
Not just like any bone in general. Because I have a friend who has a collarbone like this. She
Ooh.
did it when she was 8, and still like that.
And they didn't.
And she had
Set
a
it?
fractured scapula too. So they did not reset it, they just.
Is she kind of like this?
No, it's just set like
And
that.
you can feel it and it's weird?
Mhm. Like she has trouble with her shoulder, like it'll get really
I would
stiff.
say that's probably realistic. So when bones don't align with themselves, you can certainly see body structures being out of alignment elsewhere. It's kind of like making a puzzle, you get one piece out of place and you're gonna have problems elsewhere in the puzzle, okay? But I don't wanna speculate too much.
No, like physically she's fine, I would think something was like important somewhere wrong with her posture or something. She's like, no.
Man, I wanna talk to you guys so bad about, Montezuma right now.
Oh,
And the
boy.
Aztecs. They used to do terrible things, right? So they would break people's bones and put them in casts that make them grow and heal back in weird shapes. And go do some reading. It wasn't all sunshine and flowers in Tenochtitlan back in the day. Yeah.
What would necessarily happen to like the veins and the arteries and everything inside?
Solid question. I'm not sure. No idea. Because when a bone breaks, what you're going to find is it forms a big blood clot, and the arteries and veins reconnect through that blood clot. But I do know distinctly that there have been times in human history where people have purposefully broken bones to realign them in weird ways for whatever reason. So I know that can happen and people can live. It was one of the big, what's his name? Hernando Cortez? One of the big surprises for Cortez was meeting people with bones and S-shapes and stuff like that. Yeah. Go read that, it's wild. It's a wild set of stories. All right, completeness of the break. Complete versus incomplete, this is exactly what it sounds like. Bone either breaks or it doesn't, okay? Sometimes they can crack and be incompletely broken, but a complete break is where it breaks all the way through. You can imagine this as being an H thing. take a 6-year-old and they break their leg, probably like this, because their bones are pretty soft.
So is that like sprung?
Say again?
Is that like sprung when it's incomplete?
No, it's sprain is normally like a little bit of fibrous connective tissue damage. All right, we'll talk about sprains and tears and stuff in a little bit. That's normally a ligament reference. Okay. Whereas you take somebody that's 60 years old and you bend the bone, it's going to break all the way through. Okay, complete fractures. Then there's the fun ones, compound and simple fractures. Okay, a simple fracture is simple, it breaks and it stays in sort of where it's supposed to be. Compound fracture, bone breaks, protrudes through the skin. Okay, protrudes through the skin. Man, let me tell you about my real estate agent. Boy, she is a professional. Good Lord. Like, this is a lady you want on your side when you're doing some sort of housing deal. I want to tell you who she is, but then I also don't want to because I don't know if she'd want me to tell the story. I need to ask her. Because all publicity is good publicity at the end of the day. And I'm here to tell you, she is the best real estate agent in Tuscaloosa County. But the last time I saw her, or before that, I guess, whenever we were getting ready to buy our house here in Tuscaloosa when we moved back. There we go. How's that? I go in to see her, and she's walking around like this. I was like, what are we doing? 65, 70 years old. She's the best. Like, what'd you do? She was like, John, I broke my leg. I was like, how'd you do that? She's like, I don't even know. I was walking out to my garage. I had set some stuff down in the kitchen, walking out to my garage, and I slipped, and I hit the ground, and when I looked up, all I could see is the bone in my lower leg sticking up like this. I was like, oh my gosh, what'd you do? She goes, I thought, well, this is how it ends. I always wondered how it would end, and this is it. She said, 'cause I didn't have my phone with me, there's nobody in the house, and there's obviously blood going everywhere. It's like, sayonara, you know? Then she's like, I looked down, I had my iWatch on. And I went, this is her, she goes, and I went, I was like, awesome. And she got help. Okay, they came and got her. Everybody's good to go. You know, life's good. She's got a little limp, you know, and then wiring that sucker back together. She's good, man. I watched her march up into a meeting for us to buy that house and be a bulldog on some folks. It's very impressive. Would never cross this lady. She was zero. All right. That's a compound fracture. Say what? Yeah. Okay. Sure. Did they do an X-ray and say it was broken, or did they? Yeah. Well, all right. For me to give you a real good answer, we really need to get through this lecture, because I'm going to kind of reference that sort of thing here in a little while. So, like the way your foot arches, okay? Yeah, that's a lot of pressure going into there, okay? The way your foot arches, and as we age, right, the changes our bodies go through, that becomes more likely. So give me a little time to grip my butt, but it just a little bit. Or actually, probably next time I see it, but I think it'll make more sense if we wait a little bit. So when we get there, remind me, okay? Yeah, compound and simple. Let's go here. Then there are named fracture types, all right? Like there are comminuted fractures and there are compression fractures. These are both issues of older people. Okay, the older you get, the more likely these are. Like if grandma falls and breaks her hip, she's got a comminuted fracture in all likelihood. You ever heard somebody say, yeah, you know, grandma fell and that bone just shattered? You ever heard this phrasing? It's shattered. That's where the bone's just in really terrible shape, and it breaks into multiple pieces. That's a comminuted fracture. Compression fractures are literally exactly the way they sound. You're pushing a group of bones together, and they crumble somewhat internally. All right. You may have noticed that grandma or grandpa has gotten shorter over time. My dad was taller than me. Now I'm taller than my dad. He turned 70 this past week. He's an old man. Just sneaks up on you.
Mhm.
Just wait. Just sneaks right up.
My parents are 75.
I'm showing, like, he's got my son. He's walking around. He's like, hey, who's this? Like, pictures in the house, you know. We went back and see that. 70 years old. That's a big deal. And they're like, oh, that's me. And I was like, no, that's your daddy. Ha ha ha. You know, this kind of thing. And I was like, who's this? And they're like, oh, that's granddaddy. I said, yeah, but he's my age. He looks at the picture. He goes, nope, I'm about 10 years younger than you in that picture. I was like, oh, god dang it. I'm an old man too. How did this happen? All right, moving on. Comminuted fractures. Normally, when the skeleton is unhealthy, when you're going through osteoporosis, this becomes likely. It's the same thing with compression fractures. Right? Compression fractures become likely when the skeleton itself becomes brittle and the skeleton will compress over time. You ever wonder why you like to see the little ladies in your neighborhood or something along those lines, and they have the sort of hunched over appearance and they're much shorter? There are two reasons, or actually a few reasons for this. One, larger people tend not to live to the age where this becomes so noticeable, all right? So if you have someone that's 6'2", the chance of them seeing their late 80s is pretty limited. Part two of this, males tend to die a great deal earlier, okay? So even a short guy tends not to live very long. It's just sort of how this works. Your congratulations, you know, what have you. Males tend not to live as long, but a smaller female, they're the folks that see crazy age variances. But, you know, I shouldn't say that, because the oldest person I've ever met was a tall dude. Genetics, man. I was an eye doctor in Tuscaloosa. And this guy, who was totally normal, I mean, he's older, you know, he can tell he's old. But he's totally normal, walking around, you know, talking to the folks at work there, doing his thing, you know. She's like, can I get your ID, please? I said, yeah, sure. Just my ID. And she's like, you were born in 1902? And I was like, what? Now at this time he was about 110 years old. All right, 110 years old. Hindsight, I should have been over there. Like, hey, tell me about your life, because I bet it's been a wild one. Like, I'd love to hear about it. But he was that old, man. He was that old. Oldest person I've ever been in the room with.
And you saw the eye doctor?
Yeah, man.
Amazing.
Just doing his thing, totally fine. Like, I need some new glasses. Hurry, you know, doing his thing, man. Having a good life.
Huh.
We drink every day. Reveal me your secrets.
There's the oldest man who ever lived, like every day, he would drink a glass of scotch and just smoke a cigar every single day, like 100 years.
I don't recommend the cigar, but alcohol will definitely be a blood thinner. Y'all ever heard of the French paradox? French people are just really healthy. They live a long time. They're just really healthy humans. There's probably two reasons for that. One, they're just happy. It's happy people. French people are happy people. They have siestas, they rest. They, you know, they sleep for afternoon naps. It's wonderful, wonderful. But two, they drink a lot of red wine. That means a lot of antioxidants and blood thinning capacities. French paradox. They eat a bunch of really theoretically unhealthy foods. Those folks tend to live 10 years older than most folks on the planet. It's all because the wine and the happiness. That's generally feeling good about life and drinking a bunch of red wine. My dad's cardiologist was like, Mr. Hopper, you should drink a glass of red wine every single day. Dad's like, can you show him a seat? I'm lying. He thinks it's disgusting. Probably why he's got other problems. All right, that'll do. Let's go here. This is one of those days, team. It's one of those days. And you probably realize that I've got a good 35 or 40 minutes of intense lecture in me, and then this starts to happen. You know, I think it's probably the best, because if we just try to go hardcore lecture for an hour and 20, we would all want to jump out that window.
Yes.
All right. Spiral fractures and epiphyseal fractures. If these are diseases of the aged, these are the diseases of the young, okay? A spiral fracture is the classic sporting injury, all right? The classic sporting injury. You're watching football and somebody breaks a leg, it's almost a joke. If you're watching football and somebody breaks a bone, there we go. Hey man, they got a spiral fracture. You can pretty much guarantee it. Because what's happening here is you're twisting the bone and there's an impact on it. An impact, there we go. You're twisting the bone, there's an impact, it's going to snap in a spiral. Okay? Very common. And just as a word from, you know, the wise here, if I were you guys, I'd take it easy for about the next week. Because there's history in this class of me giving this lecture and folks coming back in with broken bones. All right? I'm not cursing you. To my knowledge, I'm just telling you it's happened 5 or 6 times. All right? So just be careful out there. Yeah, exactly. Be careful out there. All right? Oh man. Once upon a time, I had this young lady walk in. She's on crutches. I was like, "What'd you do?" She was like, "We were at the football game the other night. A friend of mine was walking, and I ran and I jumped on his back. He didn't know I was coming, so he went straight down. And I landed on the concrete and he broke my leg." I was like, "He broke your leg, did he?" What makes this much worse is the next day she came in a wheelchair.
Oh no.
2 days later, I said, "What's the matter?" And it's being honest, like she clearly had some bumps and bruises on her face. Okay, I said, "What's the matter?" She goes, "Strap right. Can't use crutches."
Oh no.
Okay. I think she had a cast on her arm too. I think she might have like dislocated her thumb, like going down.
Oh, bless it.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm telling you, team, be careful out there. Okay? It's happened several times. Several times. Be careful. Spiral fractures, very common for my students. Then there's epiphyseal fractures. All right, epiphyseal fracture is going to happen right at plate closure. Everybody hear me on this?
Yes.
Right at plate closure. Because what's going to happen is this. All of this bone is beginning to grow together, and all you've got is a little bit of calcified cartilage, sort of between the two ends of the bone, the epiphysis and the diaphysis. And when all there is a little bit of cartilage, this calcified cartilage left, man, if you hit that bone just right, it'll snap it into 2 pieces right at that growth plate. All right? Snap it right off at the growth plate, and that is not ideal. This is an inset weak point in the bone. This can be a real problem if you have a person that's quite young. So if they've got an active growth plate and you snap it off at the growth plate, you run the risk of the cartilage there dying. And if the cartilage there dies, what is not going to happen? It ain't going to get any longer. So, like I've talked to a lot of students over the years where they've got like one arm distinctly longer than the other. Like you would never notice it with them just walking around. They, kind of do this. Like one arm is a lot longer than the other one. I'm like, wow, what happened? They're like, oh, I broke this growth plate playing, pee-wee football or something ridiculous like that, which I don't recommend. Personal opinion. Okay, kids play pee-wee football when they're growing. All that's going to do is stunt their growth and run risks of major injuries. I don't even know if pee-wee football is still a thing, but it wasn't when I was growing up. I don't recommend it. All right. Depression fractures are exactly the way they sound. You break a bone and it compresses internally, like the skull. The sternum can do this, pelvis. You can see these depression fractures. And then last but not least are classic green sticks. Okay, green stick fracture is where the bone bends. It breaks on one side, but not all the way through. Much like a green stick. Okay, imagine you cut a limb off a tree and you bend it. It doesn't snap in two. It breaks on one side and then the inner portion stays put. Okay, when the bones are still quite fibrous, you'd expect the bones to bend but not break, or at least to have little cracks on the outside. Very easily done, seen, if you will, in young people. 5-year-old breaks their leg, chance of it looking like that, pretty high. All right, good. Good, that'll do. It's good. Oh, man. Oh, man.
Oh shit. Oh.
Yeah, I censored it for you.
Sorry.
I always have students, they're like, why would you censor that? We're adults. I don't know. But I censored it anyway. Yeah, it was a little while ago. Stadium Ware. Anybody know the story here?
I do.
What happened?
I just know that he was going like the ball and things, feel like his leg.
He wasn't doing anything special.
I don't know. I just know it snapped.
Yeah, he wasn't doing anything special.
Did somebody step?
I don't think so. I think it was just walking around for the most part.
I know he was running up. Barely.
So they were playing in the NCAA tournament, and when you're playing in the tournament, how often are you playing?
All the time.
Like every day.
Every day.
Every day. How often are you practicing when you're not playing? Always. All right? You're playing the tournament, man. This is where it gets real, okay? Like they're going hard every single day. Do you remember sacrificial bonds when we were talking about the skeleton and how bones can bend and not break. Yeah. I bet his leg was really hurting that day. I bet it had been hurting for a week or two because he had been pushing it so hard. You know, basketball's terrible with bones and joints, man. Run and stop and have to go the other direction. That puts a lot of force into the skeleton. I bet that leg was killing him. I bet he had stress fractures, minor damage all over the place, destroying these sacrificial bonds, all 99 problems. Right? I bet he had them. And then finally, it's the classic straw that broke the camel's back. In this case, it was the step that broke the guy's leg. He didn't do anything special. Comes up, comes down, bone breaks. Tibia hits the floor. Now, why does this worry us? What's so bad about a compound fracture?
Bacteria.
Yeah, man.
Yes.
If you get bacteria down deep into the core of the bone,
Sepsis.
that's the problem. So what we have done is we talked about how bones develop in utero. We talked about how bones develop in young adulthood to adulthood. We've talked about how bones remodel themselves, how they go through basic homeostasis to keep from getting too brittle. And now, and we've talked about how bones break. So now, let's talk about how we put things back together, shall we? Now forgive me, what do we have, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes? 15, right? So we get out at 50?
Yes.
Good. Plenty of time, plenty of time. We're deep into this too, aren't we? Don't we have like 20 slides left, something like that? Is that correct?
I know.
30 slides left? They're easy ones though. All right, here we go. Fracture treatments and repairs. Is this where I'm going? Yeah. Reduction and immobilization. When you got a broken bone, you got to reduce it, you got to immobilize it. The process of reduction means to realign the ends of the bone. Get that bone back where it's supposed to be. That's reduction. Okay? Remember when I snapped my ring finger on my left hand riding a bicycle? And I grabbed it and popped that sucker right on back in place? Reduction. Okay? Put it back where it's supposed to go. Now, in the realm of reduction, there are closed reductions and there are open reductions. A closed reduction is where you physically manipulate the bones without doing surgery and put things back where they go. An open reduction is a surgical procedure.
So you did the close one.
Oh yeah, yeah, let's snap that sucker right on back in. This is a nice image set. One of my former students, basketball player, after this lecture, he did not break his bones and have this done. He had already done it. He walks up to me after the lecture and he goes, "Hey, Mr. Harper, look at this." Turns his hands over. Both wrists have these big old scars all the way down the leg. I was like, "What'd you do?" He's like, "I run down the court." He's a big old guy, right? Run down the court, tripped over my own feet, went down, and landed on my palms. And both wrists
Yes.
just exploded.
That's how I did.
Oh.
Yes.
I love your cringes. Makes me feel like we're getting.
I broke my wrist the same way, but I ran into the wall. Like I tripped over my feet and I ran right into the wall.
Damn.
And broke it.
It's good times. Not that this applies to anything, but you remind me of in our gym where we would do like high school playing
Yeah.
basketball during school, you know, that kind of thing. The wall was maybe 3 feet off the court, so there's not much distance. This girl's running for the ball, she goes to, you know, get it, and she trips and just like face plants in the wall. How? And had the best black eye setup I've ever seen in my entire life. It's pretty killer. All right, back on task. So he blew up both wrists. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, why you have, you know, what's happened?" And he said, "Oh, they had to go in and like pin and screw and wire it all back together." So you know what I asked him? Get pictures? Of course he did.
Obviously.
Of course he did. So he provided them for me, and I put them in my lecture, and he was really happy about it. He's like, "Oh," I was like, "You're immortal now.
Yeah.
I'll be in there forever. I'll be telling stories about you blowing your wrists up for the rest of my days." Oh, almost a decade ago now. Look at this. Holy cow. Sometimes things just don't want to heal up. So what do? We pin and screw and wire it all back together. And it works. That'd be an open reduction. And then there's immobilization. Now, let's be honest with ourselves here. You're walking outside of this building today, and it's raining, gross and wet, so you slip, you fall down, you break your leg. I'm gonna feel bad because I feel like I cursed you and called it. In other words, you need to be careful, consider taking the elevator when you leave. When they cast you up, you're getting a plaster cast. Okay? This is how this is gonna be, you know, you're getting a plaster cast. Within the next 10 years, that probably is no longer gonna be the case. Because if you're a hardcore athlete right now, you're not gonna get a plaster cast. You're gonna get what's better. What's better is one of these crazy 3D printed casts. This is the future, folks. They scan the arm or the leg, and they build you a 3D printed cast. Why is this better? Yeah.
So I had a cast, and my, the way they wrapped my hand was the way that my hand healed. And I kind of like feel like that probably would be more.
Okay, I see where you're coming from.
Huh?
I can see where you're coming from, so it wasn't quite right.
No, like my son, remember I told my pinky?
Yeah.
My cast is like this, so like my pinky healed.
Ah, I understand. Yes, indeed.
These are molded specifically to like your specific like
Yeah,
curves
absolutely.
and all of that
Absolutely.
stuff and
In
that.
a comfortable nature, and we know the way in which the bone should heal, so we can build that into the modeling program to make the cast. Also, what does a plaster cast weigh?
A lot.
A lot. Whereas these are virtually
And
weightless.
it's easy just to scratch.
Yeah, if you
Yeah,
get an
that's-
itch, you can get a shower. Just go hop in the
Yeah.
shower, not worry about it, because it's made of plastic, no big deal.
Don't have to put a bag of like on
Don't have to bag it up
Yeah.
exactly, you know?
Yeah.
I thought that was a question. So there's, yeah.
Alright, well, not really a question, but a friend of mine, she broke her leg playing, well, not really broke it, I can't remember what she did to it, but she was in one of these casts for softball.
One of
and-
these casts?
Yeah, one of those.
Really? 3D printed?
Huh?
3D printed?
Yeah,
That's it.
so,
Okay.
but part of their grade was to be out there, even if they had an injury, they still had to be out on the field, like watching. And so when she finally got the cast up, there was just these spots where she changed.
Yeah, I can buy that. That sounds pretty legit. Also,
That'd be a fun tan.
also built into these, can you see these little things here?
Mm-hmm.
Those are ultrasound emitters, right? So we can blast ultrasonic waves through the area where the fracture is located, and it'll actually speed up the healing process, all right? So we have the technology to really augment the way that we heal bones. It's just a matter of getting it financially feasible, if that makes any sense. It's pretty cheap to throw a plaster cast on somebody, whereas to build one of these is a little more complicated. But you can rest assured that if some pro athlete gets injured, you're walking around like this, with this built into the system. So that is a form of immobilization, allowing the bones to heal up once they've broken. All right, I am inclined, how much time do we have? Ooh, we're really close to done, aren't we? Let's do how bones heal, and then probably call it a day, and then come back for lab. Fair enough? What do we have in lab today? First things first. That quiz won't be the last week. Be prepared, okay? Close book, A, B, C, D, E. You know how this works. All right, here we go. Let's talk about this. I invite you to read all of this. I'm going to describe it to you as to how it works. That's what's going to happen. All right, it's going to do something like this. Bone breaks. Bone has lots of blood flow. So what happens? You break it?
You bruise.
Yeah, man, it bleeds. It bleeds internally. It's normal. Okay, bone's got a lot of blood flow. You break it in 2 pieces, it's going to bleed. So what'll happen is it'll form a hematoma. Fancy way of saying blood clot. Okay. Number 1, left-hand side, hematoma formation. It's a blood clot. Now from this, once the bleeding has stopped, the body will bring in capillaries, much like when you have an injury on your arm or leg or something like that. Like when you scratch it, it bleeds profusely. Once you have a scar or a scab, rather, I should say. The bone's the same story. The bone has all kind of blood vessels come in. Those blood vessels come in to bring in like macrophages and things to clean up the area of damage. Like there's a lot of debris there that's got to get cleaned up, so you do that at that time. And you also bring in fibroblasts. Okay. And fibroblasts begin laying down fiber on the outer surface of the bone. Okay, all this fiber. And as the fiber sort of congeals, it'll pull the two ends of the bone together. Does that make sense? All right, the bone is healing. It's pulling itself back together. Much like if you have a scab or something, an area of damage, you'll see the skin gather up in that area. It's because the skin is pulling itself together. The bone does the same thing. Same thing. Same concept. Then you will bring in, chondrocytes, chondroblastic cells in essence, but chondrocytes, and they'll lay down cartilage. So we go from a hematoma formation, okay, a blood clot, to what we call a fibrocartilaginous callus. Now, you probably remember a little bit about fibrocartilage. That would be cartilage in the middle and fiber around the outside, yes?
Mhm.
What's happened here is you've laid down fibers on the outside of the bone to make it very fibrous and tough, so it's not going to snap into two pieces. And then you bring in cartilage, because what do we tend to grow bone from? Cartilage. See how that works? So it's fibrocartilage. Fibers around the outside, cartilage in the middle, call it fibrocartilage. It's fibrocartilaginous callus. All right, next, we bring in osteocytes. And osteocytes start using the cartilage that's there in building spongy bone. So the area of the fracture first turns into what we call a spongy bone callus. And then over time, that will remodel into compact bone, right? So you damage a bone, blood clot, fibrocartilage, spongy bone, compact bone. That's your progression. It makes perfect sense. Like, how do you form bone? You form it from cartilage. So if you break a bone, you gotta have cartilage first. Makes perfect sense. Get me a second cut. All right, cool. Yeah. I'm pretty happy with that. That'll be fun. Excess material. Okay, so over time, the bone will grow to look just like it did before. Like, you can kind of see the scar a little bit on a bone that's been broken, but over a decade, 2 decades, it's virtually non-existent. You've got a bone that's been broken, it's healed back, you really can't see much of a difference. And that is because of Wolff's Law. Remember, the bone will be constantly breaking itself down and replenishing itself. The skeleton you have today is not the skeleton you'll have in 10 years. So the chance of still being able to see those bony scars from an area of damage, pretty limited by comparison. The bone will resemble the original because you're going to place it under the same stresses it was experiencing beforehand. And with that in mind, let's stop it right there. And